Well, without question, the passage of House Bill 1079 in 2003 was LEAP's biggest accomplishment legislatively, I think. Well, I don't think, without any question it was. But then in 2007, we decided to take another step to help undocumented students access higher education, and that was to have a bill introduced that would allow them now to qualify for state-funded financial aid. In order to qualify for that, there's a state need grant fund that's available to students who meet certain low-income guidelines. So all the students would have to meet those same low-income guidelines that everybody else, but we wanted to make undocumented students eligible for that, which they were not at the time. So in 2007, we did ask for a bill to be introduced. It was introduced by Representative Zach Hudgens, and kind of similar to 2002 when we didn't get very far in the legislature, we didn't get very far in 2007. And so we had it introduced again in 2008 and maybe got a little bit further. We had a hearing, and it may have even been approved that year by a committee, but then it just stopped. The process, if it doesn't move on and get passed out of rules and other kinds of committees, then bills die. And so we tried it a couple of years, and then the economy really went south, and this issue, again, very controversial. And so the combination of a downturn in the economy and a controversial issue, we just decided to not pursue it again and so just sat on it for 2 or 3 years. But eventually we came to realize that, look, those people who are saying to us that, well, it's not a good time. Well, it's never going to be a good time for this issue. But the conventional wisdom was that it wasn't a good time, the economy's bad. But, after a while, we just decided we're not going to be guided by conventional wisdom, because conventional wisdom on this issue, for me, became no more than a failure of leadership, or no less than a failure of leadership, as far as I was concerned. We should never acquiesce to the notion that it's not a good time. As Martin Luther King has said, it's always the right time to do the right thing, and that was kind of the attitude that we took and started pursuing this again. So in 2014. Representative Zach Hudgens again introduced the bill, and well, he introduced it in 2013 too, and it got pretty far, but we couldn't get it done. So then in 2014 he introduced it again, and this year the House passed the bill known as the Washington Dream Act. That's what Representative Hudgens' bill was known as, the Washington Dream Act, and the House passed that on the very first day of the legislative session. And that was kind of a strategy that Speaker Chopp wanted to follow to kind of put the pressure on the Republicans to do something, because in truth, we were being blocked by Republicans. For the last few years, we had the votes in the House, but we couldn't get the Senate to move. And the Senate was controlled by what was then known as the Majority Coalition Caucus, but it was mostly Republicans, but a couple of Democrats joined with the Republicans to form this Majority Coalition Caucus. And we just, in 2013, the chair of higher education just would not move the bill. And in 2014, basically, even after the House passed it, the message was the same. The problem was that in our state, the State Need Grant Fund was already oversubscribed. The State Need Grant is huge. Over $300 million a year is allocated by the legislature. But in 2013, even though 67,000 students were served by that fund, 32,000 were denied, who are here with legal papers, who are citizens. But 32,000 students, in other words, who qualified, had applied for funds and didn't get it. So that was in 2013. So here we come in 2014, right, and say, well, now we want to add undocumented students to that pool. And, you know, mostly what we were hearing from the Republican forces, not all of them, because we had a few supporters, was especially the chair of higher education, was, well, we've got 32,000 kids who are here legally, who didn't get served. Now, we can't justify adding kids who don't have legal papers to that pool. Plus, the economy is still bad, and plus, this is again this controversial issue, right? So, we were really struggling with it until there was a real important meeting that I was invited to and was asked to bring a few others. And there was a meeting held with the Senate leadership that included the chair of higher education and the majority leader and the chief budget writer for the Senate Republicans and one or two other senators in leadership. And we had an evening meeting, and we just, for the very first time, we really had a good discussion, a good, frank discussion. And they all, you know, the Senate Republicans told us their views, we told them ours. And there was about 5 or 6 of us there. That included the director of the Commission on Hispanic Affairs and a few Republican Latinos who also were supportive of this. And so they could see that, okay, well, the conservative as well as the more liberal Latinos were in support of this, for one, but it was just good, frank discussion, and eventually proved very, very helpful. But another key thing was the LEAP conference, where we brought roughly 500 students to Olympia for the LEAP conference. And Senator Bailey, who was chair of higher education, who was in opposition and continued to be in opposition, she met with a group of our students from Mount Vernon, where she is from. And that's a district she represents, part of Mount Vernon. In any event, some students just gave some very emotional testimony and telling Senator Bailey that, you know, I've got a 3.7 grade point average and been here since I was 2 years old, and I want to be a doctor, and she's in tears. And one or two others spoke with almost the same kind of emotion. And later Senator Bailey was talking and says to the kids, well, I want you to know something. And there were about 40 or 50 kids in the room. And she says, when I was young, I used to pick cotton in the South. And so I know what hard work is, and I know what it means to sacrifice. And she told the kids, but, you know, I believe in our laws, and if you are here without legal papers, it's very difficult for me to justify, you know, allowing you to get public funds. Despite the other arguments that they're taxpayers, you know, that was just the position she's in. But she's in a very conservative district. And she also said that we have these 32,000 kids already who applied. So she told the kids that, and they were very disappointed that she just couldn't, you know, she sympathized, but she just wasn't willing to say she'd vote for it. But soon after that, though, another senator came to me and said that same day, 2 hours after that meeting, he said, he called me and came and met with me, and he said, you know, we just had a very good, because this guy was a supporter, his name's Senator Joe Fain, and he was basically our point person for this. He became a big supporter after he had met some of these kids that we introduced him to from the Kent School District. But so he was doing all he could to work to get Barbara Bailey and others to support this. But he came down 2 hours after our students met with him and said, you know, we just had a very productive meeting, and I think Barbara is going to be willing to move on this. And she's, I think, agreed that we're going to begin writing some legislation. And they did. And what they did eventually was they passed a bill that was exactly the same as the House bill that was approved. And the House bill was called the Washington Dream Act. They renamed it the Real Hope Act. And that was Barbara Bailey's urging, because she said, you know, I don't want kids to dream. I want them to have hope, you know. And so she renamed it. So they passed exactly the same bill as the House bill. And then the Senate put $5 million into it. And, you know, for my part, of course I'm going to support that. Eventually, the Democrats weren't real happy that what eventually was approved and signed by the governor was a Republican bill called the Real Hope Act. But for my part, and I said this to Frank Chopp, and I said it to Barbara Bailey and Joe Fain, I said, I didn't get in this to support the Republican Party or the Democratic Party or the Republican strategy or the Democratic strategy. I got into this to help the kids. And I wasn't going to care or concern myself with whether it's a Republican sponsored bill or a Democratic sponsored bill. We wanted the best bill possible. And once the Senate put $5 million into it, that became the best bill possible, and that's what we supported. And so to wrap this up, after that was signed into law by Governor Inslee, it went into effect on July 1. Here we are in August of 2014, and more than 1,700 undocumented students have already applied for financial aid across the state. And so it's a huge response. We estimated that only 1,100 or 1,200 would apply for the whole year, but in 2 months, it's more than 1,700. So we know the kids are out there and they want to be part of higher education and be part of having a good future in this country. So like 1079, it was a huge victory for us. That's going to have important ramifications throughout history, I believe.